We're now going to look at the development of the eye in a series of steps. Our eye begins as a small outgrowth from the side of the diencephalon. Recall that our brain is divided into regions. The front part is the telencephalon, then immediately behind that is the diencephalon. It includes the hypothalamus, thalamus, and epithalamus regions. So this region right here is diencephalon, right through here. From the wall of that diencephalon, near the floor of the diencephalon, we have these outgrowths, these little tabs. This just shows the outer neural ectoderm going out away from the center here. So this structure right there kind of has a space in the middle there. This whole thing is the optic vesicle. It's the very beginnings of our eye. It grows out from the floor of the diencephalon. There. In this picture, we just see the one side of the brain, the telencephalon here and diencephalon here, and the continued growth of that optic vesicle out to the side develops into what we're going to recognize as the optic cup. A little cup-like structure that grows out on this extension. In the middle here, this cavity is called an optocele. An optocele, that's the beginning of the formation of the optic stalk we see here in the beginning of the formation of the optic cup. On the outside here we have our surface ectoderm, and then right here is where our lens placode will develop in our next picture. Okay, here we have our optic cup formed pretty well here coming out. We still have our optocele cavity in here. We can see two layers to this cup. There's the outer layer here. This is going to become our pigmented layer. Of our optic cup. And the inside layer right here is going to be our retinal layer of our optic cup. Now that optic cup, as it approaches the surface ectoderm, it induces the formation of what's called a lens placode. That will move away from our surface ectoderm, separate from it, and come in to form our lens within our eye here. Now this optic cup is not a complete cup. On one side it has a gap in it. And in this picture right here I show, well, if you could see it, looking in the end of your optic cup here, this cup shape, on one side there's a gap in there, and that's our optic fissure. Into that we will grow blood vessels. The blood vessels will come in here and make their way through and branch out inside the eye. So we have a vascular supply behind our retinal layer, and that will eventually then close in. That optic fissure will close in around those blood vessels that enter the back of the eye. The primary features of this diagram, the primary thing going on here is this formation of what's called the lens vesicle. Lens vesicle. It's derived from that surface ectoderm. It started out as a thickened placode. It moves in and starts to form this structure here. Its position is just inside that rim of the optic cup. We still have our pigmented layer out here, and our retinal layer in here of our optic cup. That optocele cavity that was in here, there's not much left of that cavity. There's a little bit right there. So that's going to close in completely. We'll have no more optocele. We'll just have a pigmented layer, retinal layer, and the optic nerve coming out. Beyond that, in this next picture, our lens vesicle is now completely separated from our overlying ectoderm, and we're beginning to form some folds around the eye here that will become our superior and inferior eyelid out here. So that's developing there. We don't have much to add to this. There will be on the outside of the eye along here the beginning of some vascular tissue, the addition of vascular tissue around the outside of the choroid, and that's going to be our future vascular choroid. Out here, and then we'll also begin to add some connective tissues that will support the eye, and eventually the connective tissues have to come in here between our surface ectoderm and our lens vesicle that we formed here, and form the cornea of your eye. It doesn't really have room in this picture here to form yet, but that will come in next. All right, an important difference we see here, our lens is now moved into our eye to the extent that we now have some of our choroid, what am I trying to say here? Our pigmented layer of our choroid now extending out in front of the lens a bit here. This is where our iris will form and our ciliary body will form right in here. We now have enough space in this area right here that we're going to grow our cornea right through there. So like I said before, we're going to have our vascular choroid on the outside of our pigmented choroid, around out here. And we're going to begin to lay down some connective tissues all the way around here. This connective tissue layer is going to be known as the sclera back here, and in front it's going to form a nice layer right across here that we know is our cornea. So the sclera and corneal connective tissues, derived from mesoderm, not from ectoderm, are beginning to form. Let's go ahead and label that. This is our sclera. This is our cornea. Now the epithelium that's out here on the front of the eye will be changed over eventually to be a very, very thin transparent layer on the surface of the cornea. That will be known as our conjunctival layer, the conjunctival layer. And it reflects back on the inside of your eyelid, so that conjunctival epithelium is on the inside of your eyelid and covering the cornea. And then a regular epithelium, that thin epithelium of your eyelid, will be out on the outside. Now let's take a minute and look at the eye. It's nearly fully formed here in this drawing, and we'll talk about the origins of most of the parts here. From our original optic cup that formed as an outgrowth of the diencephalon, we have this blue material here that comes all the way around here on either side to make up the inner lining of the eyeball here, all that blue. Some of that layer extended out here to form a connection to the lens. Here, this is the ciliary body, and part of it extends out here to form the iris of the eye out in front. So that's all from that original outgrowth of the brain. From the surface ectoderm, we had the formation of the lens placode, which started out as just a thickening of the surface ectoderm. It then formed a vesicle that moved in away from the surface ectoderm and moved inside to form our final lens. That lens eventually connects to the ciliary body, part of that pigmented choroid that grows out here, and forms those attachments. And the green here is the ciliary body. The suspensory ligament attached to the ciliary body. So there's our lens. Surrounding the eye, we first had an investment of vascular tissue surrounding the pigmented layer of the choroid out here. And then around that, we developed another layer of dense connective tissue indicated by the red here. And on the very front, that thick connective tissue forms a covering, just a continuation of that outer layer that forms the cornea of the eye right there. So here's our corneal layer right here. This is sclera from mesodermal connective tissues, both of those form. To the front of the cornea, there's still a layer of epithelium in blue right here. That's our conjunctival layer. The conjunctiva of the eye, and it reflects back on the inside of the eyelid. This is eyelid right here. So there's our eyelid, superior and inferior eyelid coming together right there. That fissure. The retinal layer was the inside of the optic cup. It has all your vision cells and other cells that relay that information in to the optic nerve. Let's see, we've got retina, we've got the pigmented layer. We have what's called the vascular choroid. By the way, that pigmented layer is also known as a pigmented choroid or pigmented layer of the optic cup. And then we've already labeled the sclera, the very outside layer. So we see all of our layers at the back of the eye, retina, then the pigmented layer of the original optic cup, then the vascular layer, what we call vascular choroid, and then the sclera layer, that's connective tissue. This space in here becomes the vitreous chamber, occupied by that jelly-like clear fluid, the vitreous humor. Our lens is here. We know where that came from. In front of the lens is a region of aqueous humor. The part just between the lens and the iris right here, we identify as the posterior chamber of aqueous humor, and then in front of that we have the anterior chamber of the aqueous humor out there. So watery fluid in these spaces out here, jelly-like fluid in this space back here. I've already mentioned suspensory ligaments. That connect to the lens there.